All right, everybody, let's get after it. So, for this one, this will be the last PowerPoint. I tried to put all 4 chapters into this one. However, there was a lot of fat to be trimmed, so I think it works out in the long run that some of these chapters only need like a few slides to really explain, as well as to give you guys an understanding to do like the last assignment before final, as well as give you guys enough info for the exam. So let's get after it, okay? Switch screens. All right, we should be good to go. So, chapter 15 is self-handicapping in sport. Something I am not in a sport, but something I currently do is a lot of procrastination, which we're going to talk about. It is a symptom of ADHD, but I do a lot of different strategies to self-regulate to try to make sure I get things done incrementally. And that type of issue is a crutch. It really is like a self-handicap. And so when talking about how we view ourselves and how we want other people to view us, we have self-presentation. And self-handicapping and self-presentation are the big ones for this chapter, where we basically want to control the impressions of other people, of ourselves. So, maybe we're going to an interview and we dress up really nice on purpose, and at home we dress differently, right? We're in the sanctity of our own home. We can dress how we want. We can think how we want. Maybe you take that a step further, where dressing up for an interview is like a cultural norm, but one that might seem adverse or less normal is controlling your image on social media. So make sure you're posting lots of pictures of you traveling all the time, but maybe you travel once a year and you just took 1,000 photos. And so these impressions can influence how people see themselves as well as how others can see them. And it's an interesting thing that it can be intentional and be deceptive, or it can be just unintentional, with no malignant intentions involved. We just want to present ourselves the best that we can. So off that and how we present ourselves, we have the more negative one. So what I spoke on earlier about self-handicapping. And this is a threatening situation because it can really mess with our self-esteem. And so since I combat, like I have to actively choose every day to get my schedule down and make sure I get as many important tasks as possible. It's something I'm going to have to work on for the rest of my life just based on my biology. I picked here Winnie the Pooh with the I'll get all my work done on Sunday night, and then me on Sunday night like just sitting there staring. I'm not this extreme by any means, especially not now as I've gotten older, but self-handicapping can show up in multiple ways. And we have this tendency to protect our self-esteem by blaming either others or external factors of, oh, I didn't know this was due, even though I could have took the proactive, stance and looked it up myself. Or, this can't be my fault. This has to be someone else's fault. And it's almost like a survival mechanism to avoid the pain of I failed or, I caused this stress or this issue. And so the forms of self-handicapping can be procrastination. Athletes can skip practice. We can stay up at night before a big game. An excuse of an injury to put up for like the low effort or poor performance. And so students who engage in self-handicapping, this is probably no secret, spend less time studying overall. They also seem to have lower grades overall. And it can also hurt social relationships, right? Self-handicappers always seem to have an excuse. Researchers have found that self-handicappers are rated more negatively among their peers. So I'll keep using myself as an example. Another thing with ADHD is a lack of concept of time. So I also have to choose every day to make sure I have in my schedule when people are training. I have in my schedule when I need to upload lectures or work on my own personal stuff. And I generally set those like 15 minutes before or 30 minutes before because I don't have a concept of time. So it's really easy for me to get carried away on something, or especially like an interest. So part of what I already mentioned about me recognizing my, we can say negative or weakness, is to take an active stance to combat it. And so how to stop being a self-handicapped leader. What they covered in chapter 15 is looking at, kind of this section of, where is my effort going? Do I have excuses? Where's my box of blame? To recognizing, all right, this is me. This is Caleb, who's putting things off, or chasing a different interest, or deciding to clean the house instead of doing a final. Some type of productive but not quite as important, and creating goals around that of like, all right, how are we going to fix this problem? What is this problem and how are we going to fix it? Not making excuses, trying to do our best to remove obstacles, and then executing leadership. And that leadership can look like I'm taking a lead in going to therapy, and so working with the therapist on ideas of how to combat that. Figuring out, sticky notes on my pillow before I go to bed is a really good way. I would have to actively choose to pick up the sticky note and move it out of the way to go to sleep, to not do that task. And so there are plenty of ways to combat this. And that's basically chapter 15 in a nutshell. Moving on to a little bit more complicated topics for chapter 16 and 17. We're covering social support, and then how it affects our performance. So, what is social support? It means having friends, family. They are there for you in needs of a crisis. They have focus on you. They're there to enhance your quality of life. This main effect model proposes that increases in social support are associated with increases in positive outcome, which makes sense, right? We probably feel we're generally social creatures, in the most part. A lot of research supports that. Things feel easier when we're not alone, when we have someone to rely on, to vent to be there with us, etc. The elements of social support and their main characteristics are social integration, network size, so the actual size of your social circle, and frequency of social contact. So if we were talking about, our biopsychosocial model, this is the social one, and these are the aspects of what makes our social circle good or bad. So going into more like sport dimensions, we have emotional support being there for comfort and security. You will feel loved and cared for. This is an important aspect. It will strengthen your sense of self and competence. We're able to receive advice and guidance that is generally positive. And we have tangible support providing concrete assistance. So when actually there is consistent to rely on. Sports psychology research has examined these effects of social circles and the impact of burnout, injury prevention, and responses or performance. So there's actually a tie for athletes between how good is our social circle and how wide it is, and our performance. And it's pretty interesting. Moving into chapter 17, how this affects us, our social circles, as well as looking into the career transitions of athletes. So we kind of have a chronological aspect to this, right? Where individuals are leaving a developmental period where they identify themselves as athletes, and how that affects them. If you identify as an athlete all your life and you go into the workforce, do you struggle with that? And so this area of research is often overlooked by many different sports scientists, coaches, athletes, which is interesting because all of them still to have a high awareness of the complex, like socio-psychological characteristics that are involved that make us us. Sports scientists have a high amount of research into this field, but it's often overlooked at looking into how people handle transitional periods, which I thought is interesting. It's like we're missing this part. So, of these developmental periods for like sport athletes, we have the ages going from 10 to 35, and we have this like initiation into sport. They start to develop, then they master, then it's discontinued. And that psychological level might be they go from childhood, adolescent to adulthood. Then looking at their social levels, who's in their circle at 10 years old and who's in the circle at 30 years old, as well as what is their education. And what's really interesting here is the amount of changes that we go through in transitional periods. You think about the initiation stage between ages 6 and 9, your best friends are like maybe 2 people in grade school and your parents, and maybe your siblings. You move on to 30 and your social circle might be a giant network of individuals. And it's interesting how this could affect athletes, that if we grew up in a athletic setting all our lives, and we grew up playing around these same type of mindset people, transitioning into the workforce that, business is a bit of a different mindset, it can have some possible positive effects, but a lot of adverse effects. It's a hard transition. And so here, through the initiation stage, this is securing the child's possibilities to continue participation in competitive sport. This is a lot of parent-child bonding. So we talked about in the previous chapters, right, of mom and dad importance in lives, as well as the coach. This is kind of the habit-setting stage of being interested in sport, being interested in athletics, developing a healthy relationship with it. Then we start to get to the developmental stage, kind of around the time that, really around 7 years of age is when critical thinking skills start to show up. But right around here is where we start to come into our own bodies and develop real athletic abilities. And so here we get more dedicated to our sport. Our average time spent in will increase. And it is common that these athletes at this age are more devoted to school and sport support. So this is kind of that stage we talked about very beginning, about how important it is for the coach to keep up with their athletes even on a longitude level, right? That we have a season of soccer is in the spring, maybe in the summer we take a break. Is the coach reaching out to them in the summer and checking on them? This is a really influential age for that to have a big impact. Confidence, autonomy, relationship with the coach. It's important. Then we get into the mastery stage, so they're older, right? So going back, we're around that 25 years of age, which I don't know if I'm a master of anything, but all right. During this stage is a transition from junior to senior level training. They'll perform at their highest levels. And during this stage, parents are mainly a support system and emotional refuge during competitive sporting events. So an emotional refuge to vent to rely on for stability, but won't be as involved, right? The parents are not there to do practice with you. The coaches and some of the athletes you make friends with, but your inner circle at the developmental stage, where you learn behaviors from your parents, things that are on purpose and on accident, the circle is this big. And those parents start to, as you get older, right, expand out to where they can be on like your outer circle. You can still consider your parents your best friends, but maybe now you're talking to them once a week because you have finals and you have other things you have to do. And your other friends you're talking to every day to help you study. Moving into, so we covered like developmental of children, developmental of athletes, and then there does need to be more research into the transitional periods for these different athletes having to go into the workforce, having to experience new relationships. The main thing I just want to make sure I reiterate, words are hard, is that the transitions here, research-wise, seem to go much smoother between these developmental stages, so even as a kid, now just talking about an athlete going into the workforce at an older age, are much smoother the healthier the social support is, the social circle. The healthier the social circle is, the better it is, the easier we deal with transitional periods. The last few chapters, as I speed through this, is the passion for sports. So covering like how athletes actually feel like they want to do these hard exercises, these hard sports. Where is that passion coming from, and how is it developed? And then the final chapter is looking at cultural issues in between sport psychology research. So we've touched on research every other chapter for you guys, talking a little bit about the different questionnaires they use, qualitative and quantitative research. Now we're actually going to kind of take a deep dive into some of the issues that we see with sports psychologists and researching these areas. So the model for passion for sport proposes that people engage in various activities throughout life to grow as individuals. Sounds fair and almost like common sense. Athletes with harmonious passion, like value and I really messed this up. Athletes with harmonious passion, like values. It's been a long day, I apologize. They invest a tremendous amount of time and effort while enjoying most aspects of their sport. And I think that would, at the highest level, make sense, right? We're probably not going to get an elite level athlete on the like the Olympic level that doesn't enjoy sprinting or doesn't enjoy pole vaulting. And so this development for passion kind of goes from at that younger stages, right? That 5 to 9 years old, activity selection. Then we get a personal valuation of the interesting activity. We internalize it and it starts to become our identity in a way, and then it becomes our passion. And so people can develop a passionate attitude by doing fun and exciting things. And over time, as they start to enjoy this, it leaves that hobby realm, right? And it starts to become part of who you are. I identify as a wrestler. I wear wrestling shirts. I like to play paintball. And it starts to become less of a hobby, and then you compete competitively. And so going into how this develops into a passion, how do they find this passion that they want to dedicate their hard-earned, their blood, sweat, and tears to? We have extrinsic motivation and intrinsic. And this hopefully should be familiar terms for you guys, right? We have extrinsic of I want to win because people notice me or I'll get a gold medal. And then we have intrinsic that is this makes me happy. This makes me better. And I don't really need to cover the research for you guys to help you assume which one seems to be a healthier endeavor to chase. That is not to say that extrinsic motivation isn't always negative. We can have healthy goals of I want to score 2 goals, in this match because I know I'm capable of it. And that is a healthy goal. I want to lose this amount of weight in this time. And as long as you set up yourself to give yourself enough time and have a healthy mindset around it, this expectation if you fail doesn't become like a pre-planned failure. And so I'll say that again. Putting actual intent and passion into an extrinsic motivational goal does not have to always be negative. If we put enough healthy time and effort, a expectation of something does not have to be a pre-planned failure. And so often maybe our extrinsic goals are too big or not realistic. And so we're accidentally pre-planning a negative reaction, a negative emotion, because we are unable to complete something. And so going into more of the passions, we have harmonious. So this implies that performing artists shape part of their identity around the activity they desire. So a artist would self-define themselves as a musician, a singer, or an actor. This is intrinsic, right? I do this thing because I like it. I identify as this thing. If it becomes obsessive, It can be more of transpiring into an overwhelming desire. It can trigger pressures. It can be, I can't stop doing this activity. I need to constantly experience it to move on to the next level. It's extrinsic. And obsession also, these all have ranges to them, doesn't always have to be negative. There's probably some amount of obsession with every elite athlete out there. It's just the importance in sports psychology that when a failure happens, if they identify as a fighter and they lose, it does not collapse the world. They have a good social circle, a foundation of intrinsic motivation, a passion for the sport. So a loss isn't, it's not death. Moving into chapter 20, so the last one, these cultural issues with sports psychology. When researching cross-cultural issues in sport, it is important to understand the meaning of culture, race, and ethnicity. We actually have to understand these terms before we write about them and do research. Culture can be defined as all the ways of life, including arts, beliefs, and institutions of a population. They're passed down generation to generation. This culture has been called the way of life in an entire society. It includes mannerisms, dress, language, religion, rituals, arts, and it's not just limited to this. Think about your own culture and some of your friends that are from different cultures than you. It can be all kinds of things. It can be the way we carry ourselves. It can be the sports that we are pre-exposed to and enjoy, the hobbies and activities that we like. It's different based on the region, right? It can be different based on religion as well as rituals. Going into race, it's been defined by some researchers as a group of people sorry, I took out my mouthpiece for my jaw, and so like talking with it out, I got so used to talking with it in, it's kind of hard, so I apologize. Distinguished by similar and genetically transmitted physical characteristics. Ethnicity suggests a person's cultural heritage. So a little bit different, right? We have race that's more of a biology based, and we have ethnicity that takes in a cultural aspect. This is shared experiences of people having common ancestral origin, language, traditions, and often religion and territory. The methodological issues when we look at culture and race is that it's dominated by westernized, industrialized societies. So Western countries generally do the most amount of research. So as best as researchers do to not have biases, we all grew up based on territory in a somewhat similar manner. And it's nothing, bias doesn't have to be necessarily a negative thing, it's just unintentional. So a proposed organizational framework has been created addressing methodological issues in cross-cultural studies in sport, trying to spread out the amount of cultures involved in research, trying to not have such a dominated psychosocial Western society that looks at research. So these continuations that we can have issues in is based on how we're raised and our religion. If we start to get similarities into individuals conducting this research, it can start from stage one. We can have an issue with developing the right research question, what we actually want to be answered, the alignment of research context, the actual validity of the research instruments being used based on location, funding, where we're at in society, and then the biggest one, if I was to pick two, I would say stage 1 and stage 4 are the biggest that biases and cultural influences affect research, is the interpretation of research findings, right? So we have two main stages where we as individuals get some autonomy in creating this study. We have the development of the research question, I get to pick that, and then we have the interpretation of research findings, which I will do my best not to have bias on, but the way you are raised, your social circle, your own biology, and how you view the world, it's hard. Stage 2 and 3 do matter, but with the validity of research instruments, I feel like this one gets filtered out anyways. That you'll see a lot of studies can be, one, not published, be hampered on, or picked apart based on the instruments actually used. So we generally have some pretty good guidelines on what is allowed to get published on PubMed, what is allowed to be on, ScienceM.com. Articles, less so, but actual research papers, there's a little bit more control over the board of what is published and what is used. So, kind of a big lecture. I actually think this one was less time than the last one, but these are the main components for each chapter. So we do have 4 chapters, but hopefully it wasn't too long for you guys. And just the biggest things to reiterate for you is we have self-handicapping in sport, right? It's not a secret that it gives us less study time, and we generally don't do as well based off whatever is self-handicapping us, laziness, procrastination, what have you. We care about how we present ourselves to people, and it kind of ties in with that self-concept, right, of how we view ourselves and how we want the world to view us. Chapters 16 and 17, we really want to look at the influence of social circles. So more research into the area of how big is a social circle. Does it relate to performance? And it seems like it does. Does it relate to how we view ourselves, self-concept, as well as how we go through transitional periods in our life? Going into chapter 17 on that, we need more research into transitional periods, not just on an athletic component, but on a developmental stage component. Seeing the psychological changes in children as they get older, even into adulthood, and how that changes based on the job they pick or their interest or the sport. And then lastly, poking holes at the main body of research for sports psychology, encouraging a wider range of cultures to be studied as well as conduct these studies. So, I hope this is clear for you guys. Again, if we have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.